Hello, and welcome to Clinging to a Sweet Memory, Tango Music and Lyrics, which Tango Mercurio presents as part of its online tango music education program. I'm Alexandra Russell, a tango historian, dancer, and instructor, a member of the Tango Mercurio Board of Directors, and manager of our older adult outreach program. Tango Mercurio, named for the Spanish word for Mercury, that mythological figure of the messenger, is a nonprofit arts education organization that builds community through Argentine tango. With us today virtually is Emmanuel Trifilio, an Argentine-born musician and composer. Emmanuel has toured on 3 continents and performed as a soloist at Carnegie Hall, the Lincoln Center, and the Kennedy Center, among other places. He will be playing the bandoneon and, thanks to some technological magic, accompanying himself on guitar. For today's program, we've selected 4 tangos that have been popular among aficionados of the music for at least 80 years, especially among social dancers. El Choclo, Desde el Alma, Volver, and Milonga Sentimental. I'm going to talk about their place in the history of the music, their composers and lyricists, and their lyrics. Emmanuel will then play excerpts for us. Our goal is to enrich your understanding and appreciation of the tango, whether you're enjoying it on the dance floor, in a concert hall, or in your earbuds. One of the first tangos to be recorded, and now second only to La Comparsita in the number of recordings, El Choclo was composed by Ángel Villoldo in 1903. Born in Buenos Aires in 1861, Villoldo is called the father of tango because, even though he didn't invent it, he was among the first to record and disseminate the new genre. Villoldo was also a writer, poet, and lyricist, and contributed to major magazines. He penned lyrics for many of his own compositions, which were often about working-class life in Buenos Aires, using the local slang called lunfardo. Accompanying himself on guitar and harmonica, he was a master of telling and singing stories, especially humorous, suggestive, and even lewd ones that entertained the clientele at neighborhood dive bars. Villoldo traveled to Paris in 1907 with the theater company of Alfredo Eusebio Gobi and Flora Rodriguez de Gobi, bringing Argentine folk songs and tangos to international audiences. Musically, El Choclo was composed in the style typical of what was called Milonga Campera, a type of ballad from the countryside. Back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, Argentina was a largely agricultural society with cattle farming as one of its major economic activities, which it still is today. Argentine cowboys called gauchos drove the cattle to the slaughterhouses on what were then the fringes of the city. The gauchos brought with them music and dance traditions from the countryside, including the Milonga Campera. Compared with the Milonga dancers know today, this music had a slower pace and a much simpler guitar accompaniment. The title of this piece, El Choclo, means the corn cob or corn or ear of corn, as illustrated in this period sheet music cover. It supposedly refers to a dancer friend of the composer's who had blonde hair. As you can see, the composer dedicated the song to a friend, a mi amigo José L. Roncayo. Roncayo was a fellow tango composer. The cover also defines the type of music as tango criollo, which means Argentine tango. There is very little documentation about how the tango started and different theories about where it got its name. But we do know that it was first danced in the late 19th century in the working class neighborhoods of Buenos Aires. There, the descendants of African slaves mingled with native-born workers and droves of new immigrants, mostly from Southern Europe. African drumming traditions called candombe merged with traditional folk dances from Spain, like the Andalusian tango, and other popular dances from Europe, like the waltz, native dances, and new trends like the habanera, which originated in Cuba. In the late 1880s, the locally grown tangos started gaining popularity outside of the poor neighborhoods. To differentiate it from the Spanish variety, people started calling it tango criollo, or homegrown variety of tango. It was a party music, played in tenement courtyards, dive bars, and yes, brothels. That's because there were a lot of brothels in Buenos Aires in that period, mainly because of a serious gender imbalance. According to the local census, by 1887, out of a population of 433,000 total, men outnumbered women by 53,000. Because of its association with the lower classes, prostitution and crime, tango was considered scandalous by polite society and quite irresistible, kind of like jazz in the US at the time. As in most early tangos, the music of El Choclo is upbeat, designed to be played with just a guitar, and the lyrics, the original lyrics that Villoldo wrote, are suggestive, like most early tangos. They include these lines, which I'll recite to you in Spanish and then in English, and you tell me if you don't recognize a couple of double entendres. Las espigas de oro, que son las que adoro con tierna pasión. Estos bigotes que la tierra virgen le suele ofrecer al noble paisano. The golden spears that are the ones I adore with tender passion. Those whiskers that the virgin soil gladly offers the noble farmer. El Choclo went on to become one of the most popular tangos in Argentina and around the world. Recorded in the United States in 1952 under the name Kiss of Fire by Georgia Gibbs, it reached #1 on the Billboard chart and was recorded by many other artists, including Louis Armstrong. Kiss of Fire was featured on the soundtrack of a 1955 movie by the same name. Let's hear El Choclo in a more modern rendition by Emmanuel on guitar and bandoneon.
Un, dos, tres.
Thank you, Emmanuel. A word about the bandoneon for those of you who aren't familiar with it. It's a type of squeeze box, an instrument with reeds activated by air pushed in and out of the box. Though it looks and sounds similar to an accordion, it works differently. The bandoneon was invented in Germany around 1850 by Heinrich Band, after whom it's named. There are various theories about how the bandoneon arrived in Argentina, but there was no doubt that it was brought over by immigrants. Among tango musicians, the ones manufactured by Alfred Arnold, labeled AA, became famous. They were produced until 1939, when the factory switched to arms production. Playing the bandoneon is notoriously difficult. The player can't see the buttons he or she has to touch. The notes are not in chromatic order, like the keys on a piano. There's no logic to their order. Plus, each key produces a different sound when the instrument is pulled apart and when it's pushed back. So the player has to learn 4 different patterns for the approximately 71 buttons. Yet these challenges didn't stop the bando from becoming tango's iconic instrument. The first tango bands included a guitar, flute, and violin. Nice portable instruments. In the early 20th century, the band started adding a bandoneon and a piano, which gradually replaced the flute. The leaders of these bands, called orquestas típicas, would often be the bandoneon players, the stars of the old guard of tango music. For instance, Eduardo Arolas, who never studied music and couldn't read it, was the first to compose tangos on the bandoneon. The tango was a big hit in Paris in the early 1900s and was gaining legitimacy as a musical expression of Buenos Aires. The first stable tango band was led by a bandoneon player named Vicente Greco in 1911 and played a big part in launching tango recordings in the nascent phonograph industry. Francisco and Juan Canaro, brothers who were a violinist and a bandoneon player respectively, first performed together in Francisco's traditional band in 1917, and both brothers composed tangos. They traveled together to Paris in 1925, which was immortalized in the song Canaro en París. Later, Juan formed his own band with another brother, Rafael, on guitar, while Francisco's band became one of the most famous tango big bands. In the late 1930s, Buenos Aires radio stations started hiring their own house bands for tango. By the 40s, the tango reached peak popularity, the golden age of tango that lasted through the 1950s. The bands grew to include 4 bandoneons, 4 violins, a piano, a double bass, and sometimes a cello or viola. The bands would also have a singer and sometimes even 2 singers associated with the band. The most iconic figure of that time was bandoneon player, band leader, and composer Aníbal Troilo, nicknamed Pichuco. Argentines celebrate National Bandoneon Day on Pichuco's birthday, July 11th. As I mentioned, the waltz was one of the most popular dances in Argentina in the second half of the 19th century, as well as in Europe and throughout the Americas. And tango has a waltz variation called tango vals, or waltz tango. A favorite tango vals among dancers is Desde el Alma, which means from my soul, and dates back to 1911. The song has an unusual story itself because it was composed by a 14-year-old girl named Rosita Melo. Born in Montevideo, the capital of neighboring Uruguay, located just across the River Plate from Buenos Aires, where she was raised, Rosita Melo went on to become a concert pianist and piano teacher as well as a composer. She wrote other tangos, along with pasodobles, marches, and polkas, but none as famous as Desde el Alma. At the time, Argentine society was very rigid, and women were expected to be content with becoming wives and mothers. It was very unusual for a woman to break into the male-dominated world of professional musicians as either a composer or a musician. And even when they managed to, women musicians and composers were rarely recognized and sometimes not even recorded. A few popular female vocalists composed tangos during the 20s and 30s, such as Rosita Quiroga, who wrote the music to Campaneando la Vejez, and Azucena Maizani, who wrote the music and lyrics for Pero Yo Sé. One of the first and more prolific tango lyricists, Maria Luisa Carnelli, got around this problem by writing under the male pseudonyms Luis Mario or Mario Castro. Born in 1898 to a family of 10 brothers and sisters, she was also a poet and a journalist. Though her father strongly disapproved of the tango, as was typical among the more well-to-do, she and her siblings listened to it on the sly, and she learned lunfardo from her brothers. Carnelli wrote such popular tangos as Cuando llora la milonga, when the tango cries, and Se va la vida, life slips away, which Azucena Maizani made into a hit in Spain. Desde el Alma was already extremely popular as an instrumental before Victor Piuma Vélez added lyrics to it. He married Rosita Melo in 1922. The song's uplifting message of hope and healing only enhances the charming melody. The chorus goes, Vives inútilmente triste, y sé que nunca mereciste pagar con penas la culpa de ser buena, tan buena como fuiste, por amor. You live needlessly sad, and I know you never deserved to pay with sorrow the price of being good as you were, out of love. Here's Emmanuel performing Desde el Alma. Thank you, Emmanuel, for that lovely performance. We can't talk about tango songs without mentioning the famous singer Carlos Gardel. Born Charles Garde to a single mother in southern France, he immigrated with her to Buenos Aires as a toddler and grew up in the streets of the Abasto market neighborhood. As a teen, He was taken under the wing of a folk singer who called him El Zorzal Criollo, the Argentine crooner or songbird. Gardel sang folk songs in neighborhood bars and private parties and dropped out of school at 16. In his early 20s, he met composer-lyricist José Razzano of Uruguay, who became his longtime partner. No stranger to rough neighborhoods, on a night out with friends early in his career, Gardel was shot in the chest. He spent months recuperating, but eventually recovered, though the bullet was still lodged inside of him for the rest of his life. Though he never studied music or voice, Gardel was a prolific songwriter. In just over 20 years, he recorded 800 songs, of which he wrote 85, and hundreds of those were tangos. In 1917, Gardel recorded his first tango, Mi Noche Triste, My Sad Night, with lyrics by Pascual Contursi, whom he met in Montevideo. This song marked a turning point in the evolution of tango music, with words and melodies reflecting a more introspective style. By then, the original hip-shaking choreography of the dance had evolved into a smoother style as well. At the same time, Julio De Caro, a violinist, composer, and tango band leader, was bringing more sophisticated orchestrations to tango music. De Caro recorded over 400 pieces starting in 1924. Together, Gardel with the lyrics and De Caro with the music, the two ushered in what became known as La Guardia Nueva, the new guard of tango music. Gardel also had a career in film. Paramount Pictures hired him in 1931 to star, sing, and compose songs for feature films designed for Spanish-speaking audiences in Latin America. 4 were shot in the Joinville studios in Paris and 5 in the Long Island studios in New York. Lepera penned the lyrics and in several cases the scripts as well. Gardel's second to the last movie, filmed in early 1935, featured what would become 2 of his most beloved pieces, the title song El Día que Me Quieras, The Day You Love Me, and the one we're going to talk about today, Volver, To Return. Volver is an emblematic piece about nostalgia, with lyrics that express the traditional tango themes of longing and loss. In the movie, Gardel plays a man from a wealthy family who wants to become a singer and marry a dancer. His father threatens to disown him, but he marries the girl anyway. She has a baby, but dies in childbirth. So he leaves Argentina with his daughter and moves abroad, where he becomes a famous tango singer. 20 years after leaving Buenos Aires, the character's father dies, and he returns to the city with his now grown daughter. The song Volver is sung at the very end of the movie while they're on the ship approaching the port of Buenos Aires. The chorus of Volver revolves around 3 verbs: volver, to return, sentir, to feel, and vivir, to live. Volver, con la frente marchita, las nieves del tiempo platearon mi sien. Sentir que es un soplo la vida, que 20 años no es nada, que febril la mirada, errante en las sombras, te busca y te nombra. Vivir con el alma aferrada a un dulce recuerdo que lloro otra vez. To return with withered brow, the snows of time having powdered my temples. To feel that life is but a flash, that 20 years is nothing, that my eyes search feverishly for you in the shadows, calling your name. To live with my soul clinging to a sweet memory that I'm mourning again. That line, 20 años no es nada, 20 years is nothing, is among the most famous of his songs. Gardel died tragically later that year in a plane crash in Colombia. He was so well loved, his name is synonymous with excellence, and there's a saying that he sings better every day. Gardel and Toccaro were both born on December 11th, 9 years apart, and that's the day Argentines now celebrate National Tango Day. Let's hear Emmanuel's version of Gardel's Volver. Thank you, Emmanuel. That melody always tugs at my heartstrings. We're going to turn now to a livelier piece, one of my favorites to dance to, a tango milonga, or fast-paced tango, called Milonga Sentimental. Composed by Sebastián Piana with lyrics by Homero Mansi, this tango illustrates how the milonga campera we heard in El Choclo evolved into a musically more complex style. Piana was born in Buenos Aires to a family of Italian immigrant musicians. His father worked as a barber, but also played in tango bands and neighborhood bars and encouraged the younger Piana to become a musician. As a teen, he played piano in movie theaters for silent films and started composing. Piana's partner in songwriting, Catulo Castillo, later introduced him to Mansi, who had started penning lyrics as a teen also. Mansi became known as a poet, though he never published a book of poetry. His medium was always lyrics, from folk songs to tangos, which is what he's known for. Born in rural northwest Argentina to a well-to-do family, Mansi moved to Buenos Aires at 7 to attend school in the working-class neighborhood of Nueva Pompeya. Some of his later lyrics, such as Barrio de Tango, Tango Neighborhood, and Sur, South, a reference to those areas, include features of that cityscape, from the long wall along which he walked on his way to school to the railroad tracks, blending the city and the countryside. Together, Piana and Mansi took the milonga campera from its simple, monotonous rhythm to a more sophisticated style. Rosita Quiroga, the popular singer, approached Piana about composing a milonga for her. Up until then, Piana said, that milonga was just something for folk singers, nothing more, a coarse music that always sounded the same. My idea was to do something different, keeping the rhythm and tone intact, but giving the milonga the form of a song. Piana composed the milonga with a more refined orchestration, and Mansi wrote the lyrics to the music on the universal theme of heartbreak. Milonga Sentimental, Heartbreak Tango, was ultimately recorded by Mercedes Simone, another one of the great female tango vocalists of the period. She performed it in the first Argentine talkie called, not surprisingly, Tango, which featured several other famous vocalists and musicians. Piana and Mansi wrote several other successful milongas as well as tangos together, along with numerous tangos, each in collaboration with other artists. The chorus of Milonga Sentimental refers to the pain of what we now call ghosting, when love suddenly disappears for no apparent reason. Here's what they say. Milonga para recordarte, milonga sentimental. Otros se quejan llorando, yo canto para no llorar. Tu amor se secó de golpe, nunca dijiste por qué. Yo me consuelo pensando que fue traición de mujer. A tango to remember you by, Heartbreak Tango. Some complain by crying, I sing so as not to cry. Your love suddenly dried up, you never said why. My consolation is to think it was a woman's betrayal. Here is Emmanuel playing Milonga Sentimental for us. Thank you, Emmanuel. That song always makes me want to jump up and dance. And thanks to all of you for attending this online program. We hope you've enjoyed this little snippet of tango music history. Stay safe and see you again soon.